Field. And obviously we're here to talk about Darker Than the Sun, and we're very, very privileged that obviously the guys here have said, you know, we're going to, well, thanks for that, we're going to come in and have a first look at this before it gets released, which is in a few weeks, so we're very fortunate and privileged, so thanks very much, Houston. And we're going to start with the first question, which is always a good one, no point starting with the last one. How did you both find the time to write and release another book so soon after Spy Octane? Because that was a big, big book.
Well, they're actually happening at exactly the same time. Do you want to tell them? You don't know. It was the first time we got asked to write a book rather than us taking someone to publish it.
Come on, Ajay. Is anyone a Beatles fan here? Anyone a Beatles?
Oh, yeah.
So the last Beatles album recorded was actually Abbey Road, wasn't it? Not Let It Be. So this book was actually written before Spy Octane.
Oh, right.
But for various complicated reasons it was withheld. And then our publisher said, well, can you put it in the autumn of 2024? They said, we've already got a book coming out then. So then they pushed it back to this year. That's what's happened. And it gave us a bit of time. We had to deliver, because I think when we thought we don't need to be writing it, so Barbara and Michael will come back in on 26. So we thought, oh wait, so we need to change that. But yeah, so as Matthew said, it was one of the books we were after. So we were deep involved with Spy Octane at the time. Spy Octane Volume 1 was our opus on general vehicles, 1952 to 72, Ian Fleming and Filtered Diamonds Are Great. A huge tome, and then they asked us to write this book. We hunted them up and turned it down.
Well, what happened is they came and found us and said, look, we publish themed atlases, and we want to do a James Bond themed atlas, and we're looking for the writers to do it. So we had a Zoom call with them. They seemed really nice. You know, this is a big one for us because it's potentially going to go in languages around the world. And they said, could you write us a chapter on the spec? And we were so up to it on Spy Octane that we just said, look, we just can't go other ones, so we don't. And then a week later they said, we want you. So we then had a chat about creatively, how do you write a James Bond movie atlas? And of course, we never thought about doing a book on Bond locations before, because there's some great Bond work that's been done in the Bond community, and on the Track to 007, they've just done an incredible job. So it's kind of like, what could we do?
And half the people here, by the way, we have Theory, Mark, Mr. Lapsford, and Mr. David Byrne, and Ian, and you know, you two, Nick's brilliant at it,
So we thought we were going to do something different. And so we talked about it, and we decided that we have the luxury of the filmmakers who we've interviewed for our other projects, and we were able to speak to all the living directors, the screenwriters. And it was about, why does Bond go to Azerbaijan? Why do you take Bond to Venice for the third time? And it was about the writers and the directors talking about why Bond should go there again, how you portray it differently. Like, take Venice, and From Russia with Love, it's picture postcard Venice. And then Martin Campbell tells us in the book, well, when we go back there in Casino Royale after it's been in Moonraker as well, we're going to the darker elements of Venice, we're going into the shadows of Venice. So that's the kind of book that we decided that we wanted to write, to use those great voices. It was amazing. When we trawled through the archives, you'd think that everybody would have asked the directors and writers about, specifically about the locations, but it just didn't seem to. And then we were getting great, you know, contributions from Purvis and Wade, from Paul Haggis, John Logan. They all came back and gave us some Mark Foster and Martin Solis.
brand new interviews.
But you told them about Mark Foster, because I mean, for us, we both love Quantum of Solace, and Mark's never really, since the movie came out in 2008, he's never come back and talked about the film in any great detail. And I think maybe he sort of feels a little bit wounded by it, bruised by it, and I think it's getting to the stage where it's now being re-evaluated. But when we started talking to him about Quantum, he came up with some really interesting stories about the locations, and you told one in particular.
Yeah. Well, one of the key things is, just to set that up a bit, when you write a book on Bond locations, it seems relatively easy. Japan, the Bahamas, Las Vegas. As you develop, as you go on to the later films, where was Quantum of Solace shot? Panama. It wasn't shot in Haiti. It wasn't, half the locations substituted. When you go to
Spain,
yeah.
Well, you think of Cuba and Die Another Day, it is in Spain.
Yeah.
So it all starts to get a little bit sort of like, hold on a second, well, where are we going, what are we doing? So you have to really roll that out.
And are you writing about RAF Risborough, Dublin for Ireland? Or, as we're both writers ourselves, what was the rationale behind it? We've got so many interesting stories. As Matthew said, we are not, if you want all your locations listed, this is not that book. But if you want to know why they were there and what it meant creatively and structurally, there's a lot of really interesting brand new stuff here that no one's ever written about before. And we have the luxury of our previous relationships from some kind of era, which we're always updating. We hope to do a new version of that. But it's really one example, I'll give just one example of the problem when you write about on locations now. Skyfall, Silver's Island. It's Hashima Island off the coast of Japan, in CGI, and it's Pine. But what is it in the film? It's not that in the film. We don't quite know where it is. And luckily, due to Robert Wade and Neil Purvis, we have a good relationship with, they tell us where it is fiction in the film, what it makes us Silver's character from the previous backstory. And there's little fascinating slivers like that, which work really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to say, if anyone who's seen the book, obviously you've had a quick flick through tonight, which you're quite lucky. It's nice we actually did the talk afterwards, see if I can have a look at the book. What I noticed was I like the maps, and you've got the illustration and the different points there. It must have been tricky because obviously London is used a lot for obviously the modern Bond films, and when you've got like the World Side Life Boat Chase and in Skyfall, it's choosing which, you know, how are we going to put this in there? Is it going to be London for this or this film? And was there a way where you looked at it that you didn't want to repeat yourself?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, what we start off at the beginning of each chapter is a mission map. So it charts where does James Bond go in this particular adventure. So that's where we get first of all. And then the publisher said to us, look, in terms of the style, remember we were writing to a style. It's very interesting that we were writing their book. We were invited to write their book. And so they said we want to pick one location for each film that you think is the most interesting, and then we'll do a detailed map on that. So, for example, what you just said, not to repeat ourselves, we say London for Skyfall. So in Skyfall we do a detailed map of London. Die Another Day, we did Korea, and we had a very fun evening on Zoom with Purvis and Wade, because they said, well, look, we didn't go there. So where's the bridge? Where's the handover? You know, whereabouts is the bunker? Where's the beach? And we were actually on Zoom trying to work out where it would actually be. So that's what we've done for each film, is we've given one detailed map on each one, like Spy Love Me, we do Egypt. So each film we just choose one location rather than show each location in absolute detail. Whereas the text and the stories carry us through the whole film.
We had expert cartographers that did those things, and we've got Azerbaijan and North Korea, so we didn't go there. This is part of, so we're inviting the audience to join us in the fictional conceit of a Bond film, but through the research, through where Peter Lamont did detailed research, looked at things, we extrapolated from the basis of where the Devil's Breath was in Azerbaijan. So we put that on. So there is a big pipeline in Azerbaijan. There is a pipeline control centre. That's not where they shot it. We was in Swindon recently when we went there. But you know, you have to fictionalise. That's the conceit of it, and that's the fun bit. So everything is based on truth in that thing, but it's fictionalised.
There is an interesting thing which I know everyone in this room is, knows this. But the early Bond films were these travellogues. Normal people didn't go to Jamaica, and so no one went to Nassau, no one went to the Bahamas. So it was glamorous in those early films. But where do you take Bond now? And it was interesting talking to all of the recent writers and directors, and they all said the same thing. It doesn't have to be glamorous; it could be dark. It's places that you can't actually get to. And Purvis and Wade said that ever since Die Another Day, the first thing they did when they would start each Bond film by sitting in the office with Barbara and Michael in 138 Piccadilly, and Michael would reach over and drag an antique globe across the wardroom, and then they would just spin it and see first of all where could we go, where have we not been, and then the writer said we used to keep a book on the bookshelf that we bring out every time called The World's Most Dangerous Places. But he said that book has been helpful for every one of the 7 Bond films we've written. So it was interesting stuff like that.
So that leads to the title, doesn't it?
The
So
title.
have you, lots of people have asked about
Can I just ask, does anybody know where the title Dark and the Sun comes from?
I do, because I read it. She asked one of my questions actually, so what is
Okay.
the title Dark and the Sun?
So we talk a lot, guys. So
Does it reflect Bond's duality?
Basically, it's summer. As simple as that.
we nicked it. When they were making Bond 20, the best Bond film ever, which became the other day, everyone was asked to submit a title, and David Arnold submitted the title Darker Than the Sun. And that was where the title came from. But it involved all the reasons Matthew's talking about. When you sit down to write a Bond movie now, they're looking for places people haven't been or can't go to. That is now quote unquote glamorous. What is dark and foreboding is the new explorative theme. So whilst it was glamorous and we were in the sunshine, now it's darker than the sun. So that title, we usually argue like cats and dogs over titles. Matthew hates punning titles like The World's Love, and publishers love it because it tells you it's a Bond book without using James Bond, because that's a copyrighted thing. So, but whenever we agree, it's instant, and he comes up with it, and we've got a kind of, there's a through line. Our first book was called Some Kind of Hero, again went through millions of titles, and he comes up with very tangentially. We had a few arguments by then, and when it's right, it's right. You know.
But I suppose the irony is that 2 of our 3 books have got titles influenced by Die Another Day.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And Spire saying the car book, again, our publishers hated it, but our good friend, and a lot of you guys say this guy, Dave Morrill, without whom that book wouldn't have come into. He came up with it very casually, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, yeah. But we just thought, it was Dark and the Sun, it was Fleming-esque as well.
Yes.
And, why not?
So and all this is explained in the book. And I think I told David Arnold, I said, we nicked your time. I said, do you remember this? Yeah, I do remember that.
So, as the locations that you've researched, which one has surprised you the most? I mean, obviously, I've read a couple of snippets with regards to a story about the Red Eye in Harlem, telephone papers.
Yes, yes.
Well, I've never read them before. So,
that's actually on one of the commentary tracks.
oh, is it?
Yeah. So before we even begin the book, I think I have depth of archive material, international, from ages ago, that we really lean into. So before we even do any new interviews, we've got a bedrock of because we source everything. Mind you, this book we don't source anything, do we?
But since we've been writing together, we've done 3 books in 10 years. And we were doing interviews together before that. And I think over that time, we've amassed nearly 400 interviews with people connected with Bond films. In fact, one of the first ones I ever did was with our good friend Norman Monstall, who's here with us this evening. I remember going to visit you, Norman, I think back in the year 2000. And so we've amassed so many interviews that, you...
And John Altman.
And John.
Paul Weston,
And I think the first thing we do is we go back to that pool, because sometimes, like when you're doing your work on, say, the cars, you're going to talk to, if you're lucky enough to get that person for an interview, you're going to do a deep dive on everything. So we go back to those interviews, and we're using interviews that we did 25 years ago that we never knew that we were going to use 25 years later. So first of all, we go back to that. Then we go back to all the magazines, all the newspapers, all the archives, you bring that together. And that's the starting point before we even go off and write a single sentence. But the answer to the question is, what was our most interesting? I think maybe it's like which film or which chapter we think has brought really interesting new stuff to the table. And I'll come back to it now. I think probably Quantum of Solace really surprised us. Because we were so lucky to to have Mark on, you know, our disposal, and Winnie Motor, yeah, the cinematographer Roberta Schaefer, he was fantastic. And of course, both writers, all three writers were amazing. And Dennis Gaston, of course, the production designer who did 3, you know, he gave us really interesting sound bites and interviews. I think what's been great about the Daniel Craig chapters in this book, and maybe even the Piers Brosnan ones as well, is a lot of those creatives that worked on those 9 films. They did interviews at the time, but they were marketing interviews. They were there to promote the film. So we're only going to say, you know, very positive things to promote that film in the moment. When you can go back to Mark Foster now, sort of like how many years later is it? 15 years later, he's going to be much more open, much more honest about it, and tell you about all the things that they didn't do, all the stuff that everyone in this room is going to find really interesting. But what would you say was the most interesting chapter of new material that we've got?
Well, they all come up. I really liked Skyfall. I really liked, I mean, as Matthew said, the later chapters where you're actually trying to explain fictional locations. Because for the most of the Craig movies, they never actually went where they said they'd go. So when you get Lindy Henning talking about why Montenegro. So now one of the interesting things about the book is it's by a travel publisher. So we've got actual pictures of the Khyber Pass, or Haiti, or Montenegro, not Karlovy Vary, not Prague, not the Czech Republic. So where there's a kind of verisimilitude about what we put in that book. It's eclectically and eccentrically illustrated. We had to go a different route with pictures with many things, but in some ways it has a kind of eccentricity about it, which I think works, holds for it. You know. Ruben Wakeman, who many of you know here,
big shout out for Ruben.
He was such an asset because when you're working with designers, he knows his Bond intimately. He has a real feel for it, and he saved us a lot of time and effort.
Well, he was really good also in understanding the picture language, because what happens with a book like this, with a publisher like this, is they'll say, right, you can use Red Shutterstock, you can use Getty, because those are the ones that we've got accounts with. And once we've got the location pictures in there, we need to Bondify it. So we need to put the Bond pictures in there to make it feel like it's a chapter about Live and Let Die and not about your links. You've got to have that right balance. And the great thing is, Ruben, is he would go into those libraries, and you knew that when he was working with the Live and Let Die chapter, the picture of Roger Moore, the generic picture of Roger Moore, would be from Live and Let Die and Old Man and the Golden Gun. Now, you can work with fantastic designers, but if they don't know the Bond films, then you're in trouble. So we were very lucky to have him on board with this one.
No, he's great. And you can see the style, he has a certain style as well when it comes to Bond. It makes his own style, it makes it his own, and you can tell it runs through consistently throughout the film. It's really good.
Yeah, we were really lucky.
Did you find any, after doing all the interviews you've had, any places were planned for location but then weren't used?
Well, we know lots of places that were planned and scouted and were not used, but it's not in this book per se, because we had a word count, a limit. A lot of that is in Some Kind of Hero, but we've interviewed lots of people since then. But yeah,
just to technicalities of filming in that country and issues with politics.
Well, one of the things we explained in the introduction is, again, Matthew and I are huge Bond fans. I mean, we're no greater or less than anyone here. But what we bring to it is a degree of interest in the film industry. I work in it a bit, Matthew does. We understand the practicalities. So when you're shooting in India, in Octopussy, the only reason you're shooting in India is that there's frozen dollars there that the US company needs to use to shoot there. Or if you go to Iceland, there's a tax incentive to shoot there. I don't know if any of you read the leaks, the Sony leaks, with all the rationale behind shooting in Rome and Mexico, the Spectre. It's a lot less prosaic. We try and bring some of that into the rationale. So we bring a lot of what real professional filmmakers, producers do. They go, well, if we move this there, there's a tax incentive. So that we try to educate people about what proper filmmaking is as well. It sounds great. Oh, we wanted to go there, but actually, you got, you know.
Because say, why haven't they been to New Zealand?
You go, well, we spoke to. Do you remember we spoke to Michael Lerman about that? We spoke to a few people about why they don't go to Australia or New Zealand, and Most filmmaking in Australian music is tax driven, and you have to. They basically buy you a studio space there. Whether that would work for Bond, and Bond has always traditionally got big tax incentives in the UK, so one weighs up against the other, and it's very unpoetic and artistic.
It's interesting how there's locations which have always come up, and then finally they end up using them. Or there was, there's, for example, in Die Another Day, they found this indoor beach in Japan, and they spent a lot of time wrecking that and looking at that, and they were going to have this, the finale of the film was Christopher Graves was going to have this, this indoor beach, and they were going to film it in this real indoor beach. But for some reason, I think Peter Lamont said, when you actually looked at it up close, it was a bit rusty, it was a bit tatty, and then,
I think
Lee Tamahori
wanted something more kinetic.
Yeah. But it's interesting going and spend a lot of time looking at these places, and then end up just throwing it away.
Famously, everyone knows they went to Iran to look at locations of Man with the Golden Gun, but you had the Yom Kippur War takeout, or you've had places they've always wanted to go to. They did extensive location wrecking in 1988, China, for what then became, completely different Mexico City. They set the view to a kill all in Mexico City. Everything in Shanti is set in Mexico City originally because it was cheaper. They're always to make it sure to get a tax rebate or something like that. China, when they eventually actually go to China, it's hardly a year. I think it was the first time it's Skyfall, wasn't it? It's on the second unit. It's not really, they don't actually go to China. But hey, that's the practicalities of movie making. It costs a lot of money to make a movie, to set up a movie. And when you see all those things, you go, oh, I get it.
And it's interesting, like some of the stuff that then happened in Egypt. So you look at Mexico City in Spectre, one of the things they had to do, what Dennis Gaston says is that, they show all that action sequence, but the things they have to show modern Mexico City. So if you remember the last shot of the pre-title sequence is Bond flying towards the modern city, because Mexico City, they put so much money, or give them so much incentives to come and shoot there, they say, well, the payoff has got to be, you've got to show what the pull is to come. So all that shot is simply because they've got to go for the makeup.
Film is a very important art form. It sells a country, it sells a culture, it sells a nation. James Bond is a wonderful advocate of UK PLC. And when he goes to a different country, it's an amazing thing. How many of us here go to a location only because it's spent 2 minutes in a Bond film? Think of all the tourist revenue. People arrive to that. I've got a table of experts here. So film will, and in our case it's Bond. I know Harry Potter fans, we know Star Wars fans, everything. So film is a really important cultural currency, and nations and governments understand it, and especially with James Bond. It opens avenues, as they say, to parabolic, that no one can ever get. And in a way, that's what Dark in the Sun is trying to give you a little bit of flavour of. It's not, it's, we're trying to make people understand a slightly deeper rationale behind it. But having fun. There's James Bond, isn't it?
Yeah, and he comes across, I think, very well in the choice of the storytelling, the background and all that. Was there a holy grail location that you really wanted to include, or some information that had to be in there that wasn't, you wanted to in there that you couldn't use anywhere else? You thought, oh, I really need this in there.
No, I don't think this was that kind of book. This wasn't the subcategory where discussed it. This was what was in the film, and there's a little bit of discussion there. There was nothing that we couldn't do or didn't do like that. To some extent, so we've got lots of pictures actually from location hunters, from Gerard Bars, from Thomas Gleitzman, from Mark O'Connell.
Interestingly, you think that one of the most famous locations will be really easy to illustrate, which is the beach from Doctor No when Honey Rider comes out of the water. Because that's private property, you'd be surprised that when you start to go through the picture, you just get a really gorgeous shot of that beach, just how it looks.
it doesn't exist. So we were very lucky that Mr. David Trubitsky had been to it and had this beautiful picture. It was exactly what we wanted, but we spent months just trying to find the perfect shot of the most iconic on location.
And we've got to shout out to all those location hunters
Absolutely.
in here. Thomas Blythe, who I've never met, is my guru. Yeah, I think he rents a helicopter to approach the Bangkok Harbour Tower at the right angle, or maps the Malaga skyline, which in Spain, which is where they completed the shooting of the only twice helicopter chase. You know, these people go to amazing degrees of accuracy, and so we're not in the same universe as those guys, but we love what they do. What you were coming up with today was amazing, yeah.
Well, it's when we all have 5 different locations for the same scene.
Yeah.
As we speak to them.
Yeah. We do get that. We do get discrepancies in the official record with Eon. Maybe not so with this book, but Spy Octane certainly. With the official record is often wrong. That's why we always try and put sources in to try and add a bit of veracity. And we want to be wrong, by the way. When we're wrong, we hope not to be wrong. But when we are wrong, we want to be corrected. Because that's the only way you improve. Hopefully, we don't get caught out too often.
I mean, it is challenging because, as you know, locations that are there suddenly disappear over time. So some of them, like obviously fortnights ago, we've been to that part and sort of sussed that bit out. So where was it? And then you end up debate. Some people would suggest it's there, and there's kind of like a myth or a rumour. Did you have a lot of that appearing? That you tried to just set the record straight?
We did, but we'd already done our research, so we weren't saying this was, everyone thought it was this, it was that. So we took just the factual stuff. We do say that locations are fudged. I mean, especially now with Matera and No Time to Die, it's all digital. You might go to Matera, it's not the same place, is it? We have a bit on that. We try to explain what happens.
Were there any, well, I suppose we kind of covered some of this, but were there any myths or misconceptions about long locations that you found?
No, I don't think so.
No. We did have, I mean, we did have some amusing anecdotes.
I've heard there's been a few. I like living that dialogue.
You know,
I've never done that before.
Well, Matthew and I were very lucky to be invited on the set of Casino Royal at Pinewood. And it was a fantastic, this was the play show, the sinking play show. So we went on top of the hydraulics, and Martin Campbell and Phil Mayhew, the DOP there, as we passed our tourism. It's all going to be shit anyway. Yeah. But we had lunch on this Venetian piazza, which was on the 007 stage. And it's quite surreal when you go there, the magic of movie making, and being favoured by these people who picture ourselves. But you see the magic of filmmaking. Everyone there who knows Pinewood, a few guys have been there, had did little bits in Live and Let Die, in Sandy Anger's residence. It's just a corner of Pinewood Studios. So all that, half of London is actually substituted locations.
Of course, Canberra's office was in Helen Hall.
That's right.
There's a short scene there you can actually see outside.
St. Petersburg in St. Petersburg in London. I mean, half of Russia, half of China is all in London. That's what we find interesting as well. Yeah.
But as I said, in terms of like the very specifics, we weren't able to make this, doorways and alcohols, because we just couldn't have covered that. It's a very different subject, and we've seen it done so well elsewhere. So,
And they didn't want that.
No, they didn't want that.
So this is actually aimed at travel audience. This is a big publisher. We hope this book will be translated in several languages around the world.
The really interesting for us is that we don't even know where to go and find this book. We don't know if it's in the film section or the travel section. That's something we'll probably find out next week. So we don't even know where that's going to be.
I mean, this book we just only got it in the nick of time. So we're it's like a new thing we're finding out about. It's a slightly different thing. We've just written a car book. I must say something. Mr. Field here is the award-winning Mr. Field. He won the RAC Book of the Year award for his wonderful work on the Intangible Self-Preservation Society. That's how we got Spy Octane, which has been nominated for an RSC award next Wednesday. And what other award did we nominate for?
The International Historic Military Awards.
International. So these are hard to come by. And yesterday we find an audience, but there's a degree of hard work that's been recognised by it. So I'm hanging on his coattails here.
It's kind of quite nerve-wracking for us in the sense that, as I said tonight, we're really privileged to be here, and we're this great group of Bond fans, because we all share this common interest. But this is the first time anyone's actually seen Dark and Sun. In fact, it's the first time we've really seen Dark and Sun. They was out there when we were signing books an hour ago. It was the first time we opened the box. So it's not out for 3 weeks, and we really said to the publishers, can we please take it to this event and give them the exclusive preview, which they were enthusiastic about. But you see, no one's seen it yet, so no one's said anything about it. And we've been lucky that people have said really nice things about Some Kind of Hero. We've got these award nominations for Spy Octane, and the motoring press just said wonderful things about it. But we're still in that very nerve-wracking period that nobody has really seen this book. So we don't know what people really think of it yet.
You're our peers.
Yeah.
We're marked by you.
You're the test case.
So you're the test. So we are still biting our fingernails. You never know. We hope it works. There's no more self-critical than Matthew and I about each other.
But I think that goes with any artist. Enjoying your music, anybody who does it, and you release it for the first time, you're so attached to it. It's like you're so attached to it because you lived and breathed it for days and days and days and days. And then when you release it, you just don't know if people are going to have the same festival then. It's just that feeling of thinking, what they're going to say.
That's really good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Sort of sweat pouring on stuff. It's really nice. But no, it's really good. It's really nicely put together. I like how it's split up. You've got the maps, and you've got the fictional locations, and you've got the real locations, and it's marked pretty nicely on that. And then you've got a nice bit of storytelling. And I think what we find as well, that actually when you get an actor on it, they'll tell you one story, and it'll be the same story that gives you a cycle. Whereas you talk to people that worked on the film, the day that John runs somebody over or something crazy like that one day, you think, well, how old is the story, and then it emerges. Obviously, I really like the Forums and Runners, with the walkways, you've got the caviar factory, that was at Pinewood. But that was influenced by a real location, and that's what it gets looked at.
Yeah, so that's what this book is.
Interesting, coming back to some of the people you interviewed before we went back to it, so we'll take, Paul Weston, who's with us tonight. He's, I'm sure many of you have heard him tell the wonderful story about Timothy Dalton becoming vulnerable on the Rock of Gibraltar, and the fear he had when, Cuffy let him loose and said you can have him for so many days to go down on top of the Land River. And it was a great story for our car. But Paul, tell us what did it mean to be on the Rock of Gibraltar? What was the challenges of that location for those stunts? And it was things like, must have run the games over. So there's lots of things there to do.
Go back to John Glenn.
Yeah.
Because he has a very personal connection.
Yeah. It was about getting all these people to talk about these same stories, but from a completely different angle. We want to talk about the location, not the actor.
Yeah. And he has a great bit in there that John actually mentioned. He said, you see Gibraltar from the land, not from the air.
Yeah.
That's why they shot from the air. And I look forward to that. When I read that, actually really run true. Said, what a great opening, and we'll jump in, great opening scene. Right, should we throw open the Q&A, so we'll let you guys ask the questions. Anyone, by the way, has anyone got any questions? No one put your hand up.
Yeah, could I just ask one question? Anything to do with location is going to obviously hang on the pictures. And how are you able to get all these pictures without copyright problems?
He's a lawyer.
Sometimes I have to earn my money. Look, we have it's a big international publisher with heavy duty people, and they managed to source effectively. So a couple of days ago, but effectively, they managed to source clear pictures. Plus, then we sourced from the Bond community interesting pictures. People like Derek Medding's son, they gave us pictures. Billy Bogner Jr. gave us pictures. John Glenn gave us pictures. A lot of the Bond fans. So we were really privileged to get stuff no one's ever seen before. That's owned by them. You know, he's a monk or something.
He's an entree.
He's an entree or something. So these are things that aren't anywhere else. So yeah.
And you know, and as I just said, because it was such a big publisher, they've got access to Getty and to Shutterstock, and they've got the luxury of having, you know, they're doing 30 books a year, so they have these accounts with these big agencies, which, you know, especially the older Bond films are actually easier to illustrate, because in those days, you know, these photographers would visit the sets of the films. It didn't happen so often now. So, you know, you'd have, you know, Life magazine would visit the set, or the Daily Mail would visit the set, and so those pictures,
Non-doubt.
they don't belong to the film company, they belong to the photographer. They then get put into these archives, and then Getty will license them to people like publishers like our publisher. So those early ones were actually easy. It was actually harder when we got down to the more recent ones, because, you know, the security and having photographers like that on set doesn't really happen anymore. It's really the unit photographer, and that's it. So that was the challenges. But yeah, the 60s and 70s and into the 80s were much, much easier to find Bond pictures for.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's interesting. It must have been a bit of a challenge, really.
Very.
That's putting it hard.
I like a good challenge. I missed the lashes.
It'd be kind of it.
It's nothing to do with me. I was just wondering, was there any location that you wrote about that you thought, I really should go there, that you hadn't been to before?
Loads of them.
Tons. Yeah. Unlike you, Philip, we're not as well globally, well, half the people in this room, we're not as globally oriented as you are. Well, I think we want to go to Jamaica and GoldenEye.
GoldenEye is number one.
Japan. We have been privileged. We did go to Piz Gloria with George Lazenby. And we have been very privileged in where we have been. And we've been on set a few times. But we've been to, well, we were in Miami, weren't we?
Yeah, we were.
Last year. And so went to the Fontainebleau. But generally, I mean, I've been to Nepal. Generally, you go to these locations, but unlike you, you've got a very understanding wife and family. If I took my friends and family and made them do those obscure pictures, I don't think I'd have much of a family left. I don't know. Mind you, your son William would eat it up.
You would. I've actually got a question for Norman. When the sound effects, was there a Bond film that you worked on where, you know, the location really spoke to you when you were creating the sound effects? Is there one film in particular where you were really proud of being able to pull the location, the flavour that lays into what you created?
I think Jamaica.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I've travelled a lot. I've never been to Jamaica, and it just gave, you know, had something about it that attracted me. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Right, does anyone else have any questions? We'll have to be all the other side, don't we?
Of course.
I'll just
Get my steps up.
You said part of the deal with the locations was these locations want you to portray them as a place for tourists to come. But you said conversely that these locations are places that are forbidden or off limits. That seems like, I'm going to call it a disconnect. But I mean, how do you address that?
It's a very good point. So, you know what we say, oh, the locations give you incentives to go there. That's not meant to be public. You're not supposed to know that Rome will provide X or Y, Z. And secondly, the forbidden locations, well, they didn't go to North Korea. They didn't go to Haiti. They had to replicate Haiti elsewhere. They had to replicate Haiti in the Panama Canal. So those, like, they didn't go to Montenegro. You know, those are the quote-unquote forbidden locations because of infrastructure, because of currency, because of climate. You know, all these things are there. All these obstacles are there to go something really weird and exotic. Mind you, Bond films did pioneer. They shot internationally in places films had never really been before. Egypt and The Spine of Me was central casting in that movie. India in a major movie, although there was a season of that. Japan, you know, lots of Bond films pioneered shooting in locations no film had ever gone to before.
Yeah.
But it's a good point, Alan, because there is a disconnect there, but in a way what we're doing is kind of digging underneath what after all, no Mexico doesn't want you to know that we gave production support. This is not as simple as paying money. It's without getting into the details of film finance. You get other ways of getting your money back. But that's not meant to be known. We just know. London, I mean, I don't think you've been following, dare I mention the T-word, Trump. But Trump is trying to get film production back in America, back in Hollywood. He's raising tariffs. He's maybe the film industry in the UK, such as it is, might be affected by it. Britain has one of the best tax incentives for international filmmaking. Sure, we have great technicians and great studio facilities, but it doesn't hurt that 40% of your spend comes back to you. Those are the real grown-up questions. When you set up a film, you go, where can we get? You want to shoot a film in Scotland? You want Scottish financing? Great. You have to have Scottish cast or Scottish things. These are some of the real reasons why things get shot when they get shot. You know, I'm sure there's lots of artistic and true reason has to be there, but there's a lot of grown-up thinking as well that goes behind it. Especially with Bond films being so I'm sorry.
Hi guys, bravo again, it's a fine publication. I know this is going to be great, I haven't even read it yet, but I know your work in the past, and yeah, bravo for that. But what I've got to ask is, when you was compiling this, well before you even compiled this, did you amass all of the photographs, all of the locations and everything? In fact, do you know what, I think we've got enough now to make a book, or did you think, I'm going to do a book, let's now get all the gear together? Which way round did
that's
that
a good question. Yeah.
Good question. This was a publisher asked us to do this book. So we are in the remit of the publisher, their resources. So we couldn't get pictures from any source. We couldn't just decide, because we of course have great archives, but we couldn't publish it unless you had clearance. You'll see the picture credits as long as you're on. Because it's being published internationally by a big publisher, those are choices at a grown-up level. You know.
They were very much, they took the idea that they said, look, you write the book, okay, so we'll get to Living Deadhouse, you go write about Gibraltar, you go write about Vienna, you do all of that, and then we've got picture researchers that will come on and we'll find the real locations to those places. So, you know, as I said, when you flip through the book, you'll see it's peppered with, you know, it's a travelogue in itself. So, you know, we've got pictures of New Orleans and the streets where they filmed it, but as they are today, the sort of pictures you'd see in travel brochures and things like that, and then it's peppered with the Bond images to Bondify it. So we kind of didn't get caught up in thinking we've got to research these photographs. For us, for the generic pictures, our job was to make sure that we told a story about the making of the James Bond films from a very unique perspective that had never been done before. That was really the most important thing for us. And a lot of that research, even though we had oversight on it, and some things we said that doesn't work, or we don't want that in there, we left a lot of that to them. I mean, we had to allow them to do that because that's what they do. I mean, they're professional publishers. We just
professional travel publishers.
Yes.
Which is a key thing. But to some extent, the location maps and things were their decisions. They decided what would work for their audience. You know.
So we just wanted to really concentrate on making sure we had all the correct interviews, that we'd spoken to as many people as we could that had an interesting story. The writers, the directors, the production designers, they were the most important people that we wanted to speak to.
Didn't we have an edit issue where they cut out some of the interesting stuff?
Yeah, that was interesting, because then when you go through this process in the book where once you turn the manuscript in, You know, somebody gets told this, you know, who potentially hates Bond films, right? And so they're then reading it for sanity, to make sure that, you know, if you mention Normal Monster on page 8, if you mention them again on page 52, you know, you set them up all over again, they just go through and make sure that, you know, you don't need to introduce it, because you talked about it 10 pages ago, you know, so they go for that. But what was interesting, they also cut down. So they also cut out stuff that they don't think is interesting. And when we get the notes back, that's a nerve-wracking moment, because you know, what have they cut? What do they really think of it? And you're sort of like going through it, and you think, what have you got rid of that for? Bond fans are going to love that bit. I mean, which will give us a couple of examples. There was the stuff, I guess, in Dine of the Day, wasn't there?
Yeah, what was that again? I remember the stuff from Spectre about Tripoli.
Yes, that was interesting.
So in Spectre, Blofeld's, you know, where Bond is tortured, that clinic beneath the Moroccan desert or whatever it is, that was actually based on Muammar Gaddafi's. He had apparently a suite of private clinics underneath that. So we put that little bit of historical detail in there. The inspiration for this, there was a real rumour of that stuff, and they cut that out.
Yeah.
We said, oh, that's interesting. You know, and Matthew and I are very compliant. We do exactly what we're told. No. We must be the worst writers ever for editors and people like, because we always fight like tooth and nail. So, but hopefully they get the picture, you know. So yeah, things like that you find you've got to fight your corner. You know.
Being cheeky with the last little quickie one maybe is that I haven't read it, I've had it 10 minutes and I can't wait to read it, but is there anything in there regarding Bond locations that were not actually made it to the final cut? Some locations where they've done some scenes and decided they didn't want it and they moved the location?
We know that's in some kind of hero. We couldn't put that in this book because it was page count, it was word count. But we do have a bit of that. We do have at the end and the beginning of locations Guy Hamilton wanted.
Guy Hamilton wanted to do in Diamonds on Forever. He pitched an idea about having a foot chase through Disneyland. Well, first of all, Disney probably would have liked it, but you know that didn't go in. John Glenn never talked about doing a motorbike chase on the Great Wall of China. You know, that was talked about at one point. So, and you know.
And the ending of No Time to Die, the initial ending, was Bond was going to go to space.
That's, you know, he was still going to die, but he was going to die going into space. Yeah. So, you know, that didn't happen. So, yes, we do mention a few of those things, which are, you know, locations which they talked about, researched, but then, you know, they got binned for whatever reason.
I think John Logan speaks very eloquently about what locations are altered, but doesn't he talk about musicals, like a musical number in a Bond film, and whatever that location is doing something dramatic, something artistic. It's trying to get the audience in a mood and a feeling, place that have been. I think, wasn't the pre-title sequence of Spectre going to be set in Cuba? Yeah. Or there was going to be an F1 thing, and I think what Sam Mendes, who was very generous with us, was we wanted some immersive experience. You drop Bond in the middle of something. It happened to be the Day of the Dead Festival, which is great because prior to Spectre, there was no actual Day of the Dead Festival in Mexico, and fiction leads reality in that. And now there's a great exhibition, there's a great Day of the Dead Festival using all the Spectre costumes. So we like it when that happens in Bond. It affects the culture.
And sometimes, you know, you think, well, why did the certain occasions, why did they go? I mean, taking Tomorrow Never Dies, for example, why did they set the car scenes in Hamburg? Why didn't they have them in Paris? Why didn't they have them in Madrid? Why is it Hamburg? Out of all the places, because it's an unusual city. It's not the most obvious choice to have a villain's headquarters in Hamburg. And you know, Roger Scott sort of said, look, I'd made commercials 25 years before that in Hamburg, and we were making that film really quickly. I mean, they started shooting the first week of April, and the film was out the first week of December. So to make that film record time, so we had to go to places that we knew. And he said, because I knew that city, there was no point going to Seville. I knew that we could make a film, we could do those scenes in Hamburg. I knew Hamburg. I knew that, from an architectural point of view, it would add something, it would give us something. And it's as simple as that. That's why we went there. So some of those are interesting insights, I think, make you look.
As well.
Yeah.
You know.
We just, you make sure that when you go back and maybe when you read a chapter of this book, and this book is designed that you can read one chapter and go to the film, and maybe you just look at it in a different way. And I think that's the way we've written all of our books, is that we want you to look at Bond films in a different way, and it goes with an interesting, a new fan education on one particular subject, and in this instance it happens to be the locations.
Right, does anyone have any last questions?
One last question.
One there, we'll go over there.
What's next for you guys?
Well, as you know, we did Spy Octane, the vehicles, Volume 1, and that was Dr. No Diamonds Are Forever. And so we're hard at work on Volume 2, which is Live and Let Die to License to Kill. So that's going to be another humongous 450-page coffee table book that, is so big, fits 7 films, 9 films in it.
And we do have an idea, we haven't really said this, but to revisit our book, Some Kind of Hero, the 800-page Bible on James Bond. I don't want to call it a Bible because it's not. But the last version of that ends with Danny Boyle being signed to direct. So we want to revisit that, but probably
After the next step.
probably we're going to have 3 volumes of Some Kind of Hero. 3 800 pages, because we've got so much amazing material in the old films and the new films.
Well, one thing we did is we needed a coding project, and what could we do that would be really constructive? So what we decided to do is, I think it's time to do some more Bond interviews. So what we did is we made an Excel spreadsheet from Dr. No to Spectre at the time, of all the people in front of the camera, behind the camera, that we hadn't yet interviewed. And the amazing thing about that is that we started with Dr. No and interviewed as many people from there as we could have left and went through. I mean, we'd already interviewed a lot of people, but we thought, let's do more. And the interesting was, because everybody around the world wasn't doing anything, we were able to get a completely fresh set of interviews with people that probably wouldn't normally get. I mean, we had to really work hard. In-depth interviews, yeah. Like, for example, we always wanted to interview, say, John Taylor about A View to a Kill, Duran Duran. And we tried in the past, and of course, you would they were sending it back to us. They're either on tour or they're doing something. And I remember we got an email back from the management of Duran Duran, and they said, John's in New York, they'll talk to you tomorrow. I thought, Christ, we better start making sure we've read every single interview that he's ever given since 1985. And when we got onto the Zoom call, the publicist said, right, you've got 15 minutes, and John said, look, hold on a second, I'm sitting here in this apartment, I'm not doing anything. If they want to speak to me about A View to a Kill of James Bond for an hour, then they can be my guest. And that's how we got an awful lot, we did an awful lot of our interviews. I mean, I remember we interviewed with John here, John Altman during that time. I mean, so we amassed, as James Bond stories, we amassed so many interviews, and I'm talking thousands and thousands of hours of audio, which, as I said, the only way to really present that is to go back to our original work, which I think is, something we're immensely proud of, is to go back and tell that story over 3 books.
I think with the new volume of Some Kind of Hero, if and when it happens, just for practicality, publishers won't publish a magnum opus on Bond unless there's a Bond film. So we're desperate for there to be a new Bond film on one hand, and we're terrified that there being a new Bond film, and we've got to bloody well get to work. But when you come to that, we're going to find we've got so much new information. It's going to, I think, change the polarity of what the stories have been for some time. Without going to, like Kevin McClory's story is not what you think it is. People, there's a lot of interesting dovetails along the way.
Well, that was something interesting that we did during the pandemic. We got the trust of all 4 Kevin McClory's children to speak to us. They were very wary. They said, our father's been made out to be the villain of the Bond world. I mean, we're not going to draw any opinions on it now. When we approach it as historians, so we we don't have a bias either way. But we had to give them some, some trust that they could tell us their story. And when we told their story from their perspective, all 4 of the children, they were hours during COVID. It's an incredible side of Bond that no one's ever heard before, and that we love to be able to.
Cinema retro.
Absolute cinema. And because we've gone back to these people time and time again, especially the directors. Mark Foster's a great example. Is that he interviewed us before we were allowed to interview him, because he wanted to see where we were coming from. He wanted to make sure that we were trustworthy, and that that we weren't trying to sensationalise or trying to throw under the bus in any way. So we've been able and lucky enough to go back to like Neil Ferguson, Robert Wade, the writers, all the directors, because by now I think they've got some trust in us, and I hope the other work speaks for us, that they can see that in a way it's beneficial to tell us their story.
We must state in our publishers' rules, our book is unofficial and authorised. You can look around that, but so are we. Matthew and I are unofficial and authorised. We never officially sanctioned by Danjo whatsoever. Having said that, we've been knocking around in Bond world for some time. We have informal connections with those people, and they kind of trust us. We don't sensationalise. It's not.
There's a lot of stuff that we leave out.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't add anything to include that story in. People might say, well, yeah, it's a great story, it's great gossip, but that's not what we're doing.
We're Bond fans at the end of the day. We want to support the project of Bond. And if that causes, we want to support the family endeavour, we want to support all those artists, some kind of hero. In a way, the title was also about all the unsung technicians, musicians, writers, some of whom never get any shrift. We find people that have never been interviewed before, they're mentioned in one sentence. So what we're trying to do is, as historians, is what Matthew says, that's what we kind of view ourselves as. If it might sound a bit highfalutin, well, hey, if it's good enough for Shakespeare, it's good enough for Shakespeare.
I can't even think of one person, but you interview everybody that's had some sort of association with James Bond films over the nearly 65 years. Everybody has a really fascinating, interesting story, and each and every one of those people needs to be celebrated, because if it wasn't all those people coming together to make these films, we wouldn't be in this room tonight.
What about Barbara and Michael now, in the new world, but Eon is not Eon anymore?
Sebastian,
are they willing to talk now, or did
slowly catching monkey? So you and I know lots of people that know Barbara and Michael very well from the films. He does too. We have spoken. I'll give you an example. I don't want to overstate this, but many times we approach people and say, we'll only grant you an interview if Barbara and Michael say yes. So we don't. We approach the intermediary and we get one letter, fine, great. I think it was Dennis Gassner who said, I've been waiting for you guys to approach me. I haven't spoken to anyone. So, in some extent, we get someone else kind of, now they're coming to us.
Yeah. With Dennis Gassner, what was great with Dark and Sun is we were able to do one interview on Quantum, one interview on Skyfall, and one interview on Spectre. So we were doing detailed interviews just on one film, where we was taking you through it very, very carefully. And, normal, we've done that on every film. We've done interviews on every movie. We've done detailed interviews over the years. And I think that, that's, we've been able to come back, and we're all about the deep dive. We want to go deeper, I think, than any other James Bond historians have done. And that's what we want to bring to our books, is that USP.
But also set it in a wider filmmaking context. It's not just, these are not making of books. There's not this, isn't that, and there's other great books there. We're trying to give it more dimension, to make people think, as Matthew said, to make you look at it a different way. The cover of our book, Some Kind of Hero, has a James Bond figure with a blood thing coming out. But actually, if you open the book, the girl, the blood stain is a girl in blood. And Bond fans never see that. The average person sees it, but Bond fans are so tuned to think of it as one way, they don't actually see what it actually is. Because at Bond fans, we all have myopia. So sometimes we think we have to reinvent it for ourselves. That's all right.
Just one more. Have you made any connections with Danny Boyle yet? And have you got any? Have you had any?
No comment.
Yet? No comment.
No comment. We have a funny connection with Danny Boyle, okay, years. So we are hoping to do that, but nothing is yet. Is that fine?
Sorry?
Is that fine?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Right, we've got one more over here. Right, we've got two more. And then that'll be the last one. Because we've been waiting for 8 days.
So just going back to the book, you mentioned that when you were mapping the fictional locations, you spoke to the screenwriters to get an idea of where that was placed. Did you just speak to people involved in the film, or did you go back to any of the original writing, whether the Fleming books or any of the treatments or novelisations of the films by Gardner, Wood or Benson?
All of the above.
Yeah. All of them? Okay.
All of the above. So, for example, I'll give you... Now, I don't know what survived as well. There were a few... So, but James Bond was on a mission in North Africa, in Moonraker, on the plane. Where is that location? So if you go through things, it's actually in the car. And they mention it in the novelisation. Or we go to anything official, like a screenplay, production notes, I think the Victory role-playing games, anything that is legitimately extrapolated from the world of a licensed thing. If we could find something interesting, we'd do it. So where is Trax's mansion sent to in California? Where exactly is that? If you look in the books and the things, it tells you that. So that's where we draw from. So we do try and trawl through all the official stuff, and where it works, we put it in there.
And sometimes if you go back to the screenplays, the details actually in the screenplay just never made it onto the screen.
So, for example, the gypsy camping from Russia with Love, all of that was shot in Pinewood. But then we researched, well, where was the gypsy encampment in Istanbul? Where was Fleming basing that on? So you'd read historical books as well, and you extrapolate from that. Now, the research, we have an iceberg of research, not much makes it into the book. We wish we could show it all, but you can't do that. But we make these assumptions, but that underpins it all.
No, last question.
I need a mic. It's not really a location question. You said you interviewed Kevin McClory's children. Will that be documented in a book, and will it differ, do you think, from The Battle for Bond that Robert Sellers?
Yes.
Very much so.
So it will be documented?
Yes.
That's brilliant.
Yes.
Because I thoroughly enjoyed that book.
We love Wexford. We love Wexford.
Yes, very good.
But there's an element of stories get trapped in the rails. And actually, when you look at it... So do you know who Kevin McClory's children's godfather was? Cubby Broccoli.
No,
They
I
were
did
very
not know
good
that.
friends. They were very good
Branwell
friends.
McClory's, so his only son, his best friend, was Tony Broccoli. Even after, even into the 1980s and 90s, after all the court cases between their fathers, that happened. So there's a very fascinating, interesting story there. There's photographs of Cubby and Dana and Barbara at Kevin McClory's house in the late 60s after they made it. They remained great. There were two families that were very, very, very close.
So it was purely professional, it was never ever personal?
Well, I mean...
We don't know.
Maybe later.
If you have, one thing you need to remember, and I think it's probably true now, is that all these families are very wealthy, very complex, very dynastic. It's succession. Being a Broccoli is a hard job.
Yes.
It's not an easy job. And keeping it together and being private, all of that stuff. There's a very human sense to Michael and Barbara's relationship, and Tina and Tony's relationship, the wider family. Anyone that works on the bonds, you know there are areas where you can go and can't go, certain sensitivities. And none of that stuff, we hope it will come out eventually, but that stuff is going to be very interesting down the line.
Very
The version of it.
yes.
You're going to get a lot of fictional accounts of the Bond films as well. There was going to be a BBC, in 2022, there's going to be a BBC TV movie about the making of Dr. No, written by a very well-known racer. Sean Connery is going to be played by a very well-known actor. Like the Doctor Who, that docu biopic they did about the adventures of Space and Time. Yes. There's going to be like, we're going to see a lot more like that. My Life of the Earth. I think we're going to see a lot more fictionalised.
I would love to have seen that for the 60th anniversary.
Yeah, COVID nixed it, but all of that is bubbling up. With the Amazon takeover, what we've seen of Bond is merely the beginning. The copyright runs out in 2034. Everything you think you've seen will be a tiny jot compared to what the Bond world could be. Now, I'm not saying it should be, it's what it could be.
Yeah.
Right, so that concludes our evening. Just want to say, guys, it's been an absolute privilege to have you here today. As you know, when you've got Bond books on ourselves, but when you see your names attached to it, you know it's going to be research, you know it's going to be passionate about what you do, and it's always a good book to pick up. So, congratulations on the book. Thank you very much for doing this. And also, on behalf of everyone from Shaken Not Stirred, I would like to present you guys, not much we picked tonight, with an honorary membership for Shaken Not Stirred. So you can give badge and membership. Thank you very much.
We really love what you guys do. We love the grassroots, like your name phrases, your grassroots level, your enthusiasm, your journalistic integrity. Going on a World's Not Enough boat tour with these guys was amazing. And all the crew members you get together, all that journalistic stuff is right up our street. You know.
And if anyone wants to a couple of books, there are still some inside over there. What we're going to have to do though, in about 10-15 minutes, is clear everybody out, because otherwise it's going to be a very early start in the morning getting this room set up. So if you guys want to catch AJ and Matt will be over there to sign the rest of the books. And then if we could just move to the restaurant area, you can stay there for as long as you want, it's open all night.
You all love that.